A teenage immigrant came to the United States to realize her dream of becoming a doctor. But a tragic twist of fate intervened when she found herself an innocent victim of the drug trade. Kidnapped and held captive, she survived for days against all odds. Authorities arrested her captors, but they refused to reveal her whereabouts. The FBI and local police raced against time, determined to save the teenager's life.
When a young woman was grabbed from her Texas home, the police raced to find her abductors. On the face of it, the kidnapping seemed like the random act of desperate men. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Before the FBI could find her, they first had to find a motive. Their investigation revealed a complex story of betrayal and revenge. At its center stood an innocent 16-year-old who found herself in the clutches of killers.
September 24th, 1994, Arlington, Texas. It was a Saturday night, and 16-year-old Lisa Renee was home studying. She wanted to make the most of her first semester in an American high school. She hoped to someday return to the Virgin Islands as a surgeon.
Who is it?
At 8 p.m., her concentration was suddenly shattered. Somehow, she knew not to answer the door. Instead, she called her sister Pearl.
What do you want?
Pearl told Lisa to call 911. She promised to come right home.
Arlington 911, what are you reporting? Who do they say that they're looking for?
Lisa said men were trying to break into her house. Men who claimed to be FBI agents.
You have the wrong house. I'm sorry. Oh, they're the FBI. They're the FBI. They said that. What's going on?
Ma'am.
The dispatcher heard the phone drop.
What's going on? Ma'am.
Then there was silence. Lisa never came back on the line. As Arlington, Texas police responded to the 911 call, Lisa disappeared into the night. The police had no way of knowing they were about to pass her on the street, or that a 16-year-old girl was now in mortal danger. Police were on the scene with Lisa's sister Pearl when Detective John Stanton arrived. As a veteran of the Arlington police force, he would lead the investigation.
From the initial 911 call, it sounded like a very serious kidnapping. It sounded to the 911 call takers that there was some foul play and some actual violence involved.
The detective needed to know everything, and quickly. The early hours of a kidnapping case are crucial. Pearl told the officers all she knew. She was at work when her sister Lisa called to say some men were trying to break into the apartment. She told Lisa to call 911, then hurried home. But she was too late. She found the sliding glass door smashed and Lisa gone.
For a 16-year-old to be physically dragged from a residence in Arlington is just, it's really kind of unspeakable.
Okay, now whose room is this?
Pearl told the detectives that her brothers, Neil and Stanfield, were also staying with her. They had been evicted from their own apartment for allegedly selling drugs. Pearl explained that her family was from the U.S. Virgin Islands. She and her brothers had come to America first. Lisa had joined them in time to start school. She was a straight-A student. Investigators processed the apartment, hoping to find a clue as to the abductors' identities. They found no prints far into the apartment. Perhaps the abductors were known to the family. The detective asked to talk to Pearl's brothers, but they were on their way back from a Houston music festival. The detective told Pearl to get them on the cell phone. They were 50 miles from the apartment when Detective Stanton reached them.
I understand what you're saying.
When I spoke to the brothers, I spoke with Stanfield initially. Stanfield told me that they don't know of anyone who would have wanted to abduct their sister. They owed no one money, that this was not about any sort of drug business. They weren't involved in anything involving drugs.
All right.
As much as Pearl Renee tried to help, the detective believed her brothers had the answers he was looking for. But without their help, he would have to identify Lisa's captors the hard way. As precious minutes slipped by, forensic technicians combed the apartment for additional clues. They collected glass from the broken sliding door and hair and fiber samples. They dusted for fingerprints, only to conclude that the kidnappers had worn gloves. Even this small detail worried detectives. It suggested Lisa Renee was in the hands of experienced criminals. If Detective Stanton ever hoped to find Lisa alive, he knew he needed all the help he could get.
You have to use the resources available to you, and that includes additional manpower, the use of the FBI. You have to use everything that you have as a resource.
Special agents from the FBI's Fort Worth resident agency joined detectives at the scene. Special Agent Kenneth Bersano was concerned that the kidnappers had identified themselves as FBI agents.
As it turned out, there was no FBI agent there on the scene or any other joint investigation ongoing in that neighborhood.
Neighbors reported seeing 4 young African-American men hanging around the apartment complex prior to the abduction. They were wearing camouflage clothing and driving a champagne-colored Cadillac.
The atmosphere at the crime scene was tense. Lisa Renee's sister was very distraught that she wasn't there for her sister, and also residents in the complex were disturbed that a young lady could be abducted from an apartment complex so readily.
The fact that Lisa Renee was a minor and that her abductors had impersonated federal agents gave the FBI jurisdiction over the case. They would work in conjunction with local law enforcement.
Homicide Stanton.
Detective Stanton worked through the night and into the morning.
Yeah, what's going on?
In the early hours of September 25th, he received a call from Lisa's brothers. They had found the champagne-colored Cadillac in nearby Irving, the same one residents had described at the complex.
It was an unusual tip. For the brothers to have just barely gotten into Arlington, to have had them drive mysteriously to a residence in Irving, Texas, which is some distance from Arlington, and in that same bit of circumstance, find a Cadillac fitting that general description, we thought was very curious.
They reported that the Cadillac was parked in front of a residence. If Lisa's brothers knew something more about their sister's abduction, they weren't telling police. Detective Stanton and Special Agent Bersano rushed to the residence in Irving. Irving police were already there. The sooner they found out where Lisa was being held, the better their chance of finding her alive. As Lisa's brothers had said, the Cadillac was parked out front.
I got a cold hood.
We touched the vehicle to see if the vehicle had been moved or had been in operation previously from the heat on the hood. We also looked inside the vehicle with our flashlights to see if there were any items that may have been left by the victim.
A woman answered the door.
We explained why we were there, that we were from the Arlington Police Department, from the FBI. We'd like to talk to her about the abduction of a young 16-year-old girl. We asked if we may just look around her home to see if the young lady that was abducted was in there.
The woman said she and her husband owned the Cadillac, but he wasn't home since he worked the night shift. She said she hadn't seen anyone who matched the description of the suspects. But she let investigators take a quick look around. They began in a child's room where her son was asleep. Nothing seemed suspicious. In another room, they awakened a woman sleeping in a double bed.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning.
It appeared she was alone.
Talking to Sandra, she told us we would look around. We're looking for somebody. Just sit tight.
In the hallway, investigators noticed stairs to an attic. One of the Irving officers climbed up and looked around.
There's a light up here.
He checked amidst the boxes and other items, but saw no one there.
I don't see anything up here.
We didn't have a real just cause to do an intensive search of the residence. We searched for, obviously, any sign that someone had been kidnapped, in places where someone could secrete a human body, just to be on the safe side.
Investigators left, still suspicious. But without a warrant, they were unable to do a more thorough search. Investigators turned their attention back to Lisa's brothers, Neil and Stanfield.
We felt that it was drug-related, and we told Neil and Stanfield that we're not interested in their current legal problems, but that we feel like Lisa's life may be at stake and that we need to have all the information that they can provide us to help get their sister back.
The day after the kidnapping, investigators again interviewed Neil and Stanfield. Despite their pending drug charges, Lisa's brothers finally came clean. They described a bogus drug deal that they'd taken part in a few days before.
What's up, man?
The brothers said that they had met with 2 men, but claimed they only knew the one named Steve.
9 pounds, right? Yeah.
Steve and his partner had given them $5,000 to score 9 pounds of marijuana.
How long will it take?
Neil and Stanfield promised they would return in an hour with the drugs, but they never did.
Right?
They now admitted they had never intended to deliver the marijuana. They just needed the money for attorney's fees because of their pending drug charges. Lisa's brothers said they didn't know how to contact Steve, but they knew someone who did. And that was all the brothers would say. The man who knew Steve was an inmate serving an 8-year sentence at the Tarrant County Jail. He revealed that Steve's full name was Stephen Beckley, a 19-year-old who worked detailing cars at a dealership in Irving, Texas.
West Wing Auto Shop, where's that at?
Investigators ran a computer check on Beckley. He had no outstanding warrants and no criminal history. As investigators continued to work the case, Lisa's sister, Pearl, did all she could to help. She hung up missing persons flyers and contacted local media, hoping someone might have seen Lisa. But the chance of finding her sister alive grew dimmer with each passing day. On September 24th, 1994, 16-year-old Lisa Renee was kidnapped from her Arlington, Texas apartment.
Who you want to see? Who are you? I'm the FBI. Oh, they're the FBI. Open the door. No, we talk. They're the FBI. They said they're the FBI, ma'am. No! Ma'am? What's going on? Ma'am?
Just over 2 days had passed since Lisa's desperate call for help. Local police and the FBI were no closer to finding the missing girl. With time running out, the Arlington Police Department asked the public for help. Detective Stanton recalls the response was tremendous.
It was truly something that brought out the public and the public's fears about being abducted out of your own residence. It's sort of something that you're not expecting in a community like Arlington. It's not something that's ordinary. This doesn't happen here, I would say, ever in a town like ours.
On September 27th, the Arlington police detective received an unexpected visitor. He was the owner of the Irving, Texas home that police had searched in connection with a champagne-colored Cadillac. He was at work during the search, but had since heard the news of Lisa's disappearance and believed he had information that might be helpful. He said that the day before the kidnapping, he threw a barbecue since his wife's brothers were staying with him for a few days. The oldest brother, Orlando Hall, was involved with drugs. His younger brother, Demetrius Hall, shared the same interest. Their friend, Stephen Beckley, joined them.
When the husband told us that the Hall brothers were dressed in camouflage clothing, it made him know that after having heard the news stories, his brothers-in-law could very well be connected to the kidnapping case.
Something else had sparked the man's suspicions. One of his neighbors said she saw several young men drive up to the house in his Cadillac. At that time, he and his wife were out for dinner using a different car. But the Cadillac's keys were kept in the hall, so it was possible his wife's brothers had borrowed it. The man said he'd never trusted the Hall brothers. Both had served time in Arkansas on drug charges.
Come here, son. Come here. Come here.
And by visiting their sister in Irving, Texas, they were in violation of their parole.
No, you ain't like. Put it out. Whatever's right.
The man sensed they were up to something new, but didn't know what. He added that the Hall brothers were no longer staying at his house. On the night of the kidnapping, only Orlando had slept in the house, but he flew back to Arkansas early the next morning, planning to stay with friends in the town of El Dorado. The detective suspected Orlando had probably joined the others there. He contacted the El Dorado, Arkansas police. Investigators discovered that 19-year-old Demetrius Hall was on parole for possession of cocaine with intent to distribute. His older brother, Orlando Hall, was on parole for the same offense. His record also included arrests for aggravated assault and carrying a weapon.
When I spoke to the people in El Dorado, they were aware of the Hall family. In fact, they were providing to me information about the Hall brothers before I could even give them the information about the Hall brothers. They were well known to law enforcement in the community.
Later that day, investigators obtained a warrant to more thoroughly search the Irving, Texas home where the Hall brothers had been staying. They scoured the house for hair, fibers, blood, fingerprints, and anything else that might be connected to the crime. FBI Special Agent Garrett Floyd remembers their most significant discovery.
In the children's room, we found a souvenir miniature baseball bat. When you pick up an item and you can see glass embedded in it, and you know that the sliding pane window was glass, then you make a decision on the spot, and you believe that evidence is a part of the crime scene.
Lab tests would determine whether his hunch was correct. In a storage container found in a bedroom closet, investigators discovered a green knit shirt with insulation fibers on it. They bagged it for further analysis. They also took samples of insulation fibers from the attic. Lab tests would later reveal that they matched the fibers on the shirt. A pair of camouflage pants was also found in the attic. Forensic technicians processed the champagne-colored Cadillac at the police impound lot. They found no fingerprints relevant to the case. They did discover a few small glass fragments inside the car, possibly from Lisa's sliding glass door. They sent the fragments to the lab for analysis. As they waited for the results, agents obtained arrest warrants for the Hall brothers and their friend Stephen Beckley, since they already had enough to establish probable cause. But they still hadn't found Lisa Renee. Agent Floyd continued to work around the clock, knowing that with each hour, they were less likely to find her alive.
We were very motivated in solving this case, in as much that we knew that time was critical. All of our efforts were focused on the recovery of the victim.
Investigators hoped they could pick up Lisa's trail, a trail that ended with broken glass. Technicians compared glass fragments from the car and those embedded in the baseball bat to shards collected from Lisa's home. At the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C., Supervisory Special Agent and Forensic Examiner Bruce Hall attempted to confirm that all the glass had come from the same sliding glass door. Technicians examined the glass embedded in the baseball bat. They tested the composition of the glass. It was consistent with the glass collected at Lisa's apartment. To confirm their results, they also tested its refractive index, the degree to which light bends as it passes through the sample.
After characterizing the glass recovered from the crime scene and characterizing the glass recovered from the baseball bat, I found that the glass on the baseball bat had the same refractive index and same composition as the glass at the crime scene. That led me to the conclusion that the glass on the baseball bat had originated from the crime scene.
The glass found in the Cadillac did not match. It was determined to have come from a window previously broken on the car. At the request of the FBI and Arlington, Texas police, El Dorado, Arkansas detectives tracked down the fugitives. They found 19-year-old Demetrius Hall at his father's house in El Dorado. He surrendered peacefully and was taken to the El Dorado jail. But he refused to say anything about Lisa's whereabouts. The search of the house revealed nothing. What investigators still didn't know was where Lisa was and whether she was dead or alive. 4.5 days after 16-year-old Lisa Renee was kidnapped from her sister's apartment in Arlington, Texas, investigators had tracked two abductors to El Dorado, Arkansas. One of the three suspects, Demetrius Hall, was in custody. Investigators continued to search for his older brother, Orlando, and a third man named Stephen Beckley. That afternoon, police found Stephen Beckley at a friend's house. The officers didn't even have to knock. Beckley came out and gave himself up. FBI agents and detectives from Arlington flew to El Dorado to interview the suspects. Stephen Beckley was initially uncooperative. He refused to say where Lisa Renee was or whether she was still alive.
I'm losing my patience with you right now.
Special Agent Garrett Floyd refused to give up.
Mr. Beckley advised that he did not know a whole lot of information concerning what was going on. After about an hour of talking to him, he looked at me and we developed somewhat of a relationship and we started to talk.
Beckley said that he and his friends had called in a fourth man named Bruce Webster to help them exact their revenge on Lisa Renee's brothers. Webster was a convicted felon and had a violent reputation as a hitman. Their plan was to douse Lisa Renee's brothers in gasoline and ignite it if they didn't turn over the drugs or the money as they had promised. When the men arrived at Lisa Renee's apartment, her brothers were not home. Unwilling to leave empty-handed, they kidnapped her instead. Beckley said that he and the other three took Lisa to the house in Irving, Texas, where Demetrius and Orlando were staying. They transferred the teenage girl from the Cadillac to Beckley's Ford Escort.
Get her off the car.
Stephen Beckley, Bruce Webster, and 19-year-old Demetrius Hall drove her to Arkansas. Orlando Hall stayed behind and hid in his sister's attic. Detective Stanton was frustrated. Police had been within a few feet of Orlando Hall and missed him.
It wasn't until later that we learned, after we had taken some people into custody, that Orlando had been indeed hiding in the attic insulation while we were downstairs talking to the lady of the house.
Beckley said that during the 4-hour drive to Arkansas, he and the other two had taken turns raping Lisa Renee. When they arrived in Arkansas that night, Webster booked a motel room in Pine Bluff. Lisa was kept bound and gagged in the bathroom.
I'm trying to find her.
Agents pushed Beckley to tell them if the girl was still alive and where she was. Every minute counted if they were to save her life. But Beckley wouldn't say. He claimed he was afraid to talk as long as Bruce Webster was on the loose.
In his mind, he thought, believed, knew that Bruce Webster would kill him or anyone else if they ever divulged the information of what had occurred to Lisa Renee. That's the fear that Bruce Webster had instilled in the individuals as part of his kidnapping.
If I say a word...
Beckley did tell investigators where to look for Webster. The ex-convict might still be at the motel in Pine Bluff where they had held Lisa Renee 4 days ago. Investigators headed to the motel to confront a man Beckley had described as a violent hitman. Pine Bluff was 90 miles from El Dorado. Agents spoke with the manager to confirm Beckley's story. They hoped they would find Webster there, as well as Lisa Renee.
Upon interviewing the innkeeper, we were able to determine that Bruce Webster had registered at that inn, and that during the time he was registering, a young lady attempted to get out of the car, and that Bruce turned to the other occupants in the car and says, "Put the bitch back in the car." Bruce Webster and his companions then drove to the back of the property and went into the room.
The manager also remembered seeing 2 other black males in the car, but she couldn't make out their faces. She showed investigators the registration log for September 25th. Webster had been in room 513. The room was rented and cleaned several times after the men checked out. Chances of finding any useful evidence were slim. An FBI emergency response team was called in. The agent and detective continued to interview Beckley. They asked him for details of what went on in the room, hoping he would break down and tell them where Lisa was now.
Once we got Mr. Beckley to this Pine Bluff motel, the urgency was there in that we thought that she was still alive because Mr. Beckley assured us the last time he saw her, she was alive and she was at this inn.
Okay.
Beckley told police that the men had raped Lisa repeatedly in the bathroom. Otherwise, they had kept her hooded with a paper bag over her head. During their second night at the motel, the kidnappers were nearly discovered. A security guard knocked at the door.
Sir, I had a complaint
The
about
innkeeper asked that their on-residence security guard who lived there check the room to see if everything was all right. The security guard did check the room and did not see Lisa Renee within the room. Stephen Beckley advised that had he seen her, that they were going to kill the security guard.
Beckley and the others were afraid that the guard might return. The motel was no longer a safe place to hide. As the kidnapper told his story, forensic technicians worked to confirm that Lisa had in fact been in the room. But after hours of painstaking work, they still had no evidence that Lisa had been there or that she was still alive. 6 days after 16-year-old Lisa Renee was kidnapped from her Arlington, Texas apartment, the FBI was no closer to finding her or two remaining suspects. Although investigators had found no evidence to indicate that Lisa had been in a Pine Bluff motel room, confessed kidnapper Stephen Beckley assured them she had. Forensic technician Joel Stevenson of the Arlington, Texas Police Department was determined to find something that would corroborate Beckley's story.
We went in knowing that possibly sexual assaults had occurred in that motel room, multiple sexual assaults. We went into the motel room looking for body fluids that may tie the suspects to the motel room or Lisa to the motel room.
If Lisa and her kidnappers had left behind any evidence, it appeared to have been destroyed by the motel's housekeepers. The technicians didn't give up. They continued their meticulous search for hairs, fibers, and fingerprints. Finally, their persistence paid off.
It wasn't until we got into the bathroom and the wall behind the toilet is where we located the palm prints and fingerprints that were ultimately identified as belonging to Lisa Renee. So the palm print itself, placing Lisa with them in that same motel room, was very important. It was a very critical piece of putting her with them.
Investigators now had evidence that Lisa was alive 4 days earlier, the day Beckley and the others had checked in. As agents drove the kidnapper 90 miles back to the El Dorado jail, they pressed Beckley for more details. He admitted that after Orlando Hall had joined them in Pine Bluff, they decided to move Lisa to another motel nearby in order to avoid a second visit by the security guard. After a couple of days in that motel, the men grew increasingly concerned about getting caught. They came up with a plan to dispose of the girl. Demetrius Hall stayed behind to wipe the room clean, while the other three loaded her into Webster's car and headed for a rural area. Beckley told investigators that Bruce Webster and Orlando Hall had dug a grave in a nature preserve near the motel. They took Lisa there to kill her. But in the dark, overgrown park, the three men couldn't find the burial site. After an hour, they took her back to the motel. The next morning, they searched for the gravesite again. While forensic technicians scoured the second motel room for clues, investigators pressured Beckley to tell them what happened next. Special Agent Garrett Floyd recalls that Beckley refused, still afraid that Webster might seek retribution.
We were pressed for time because the clock was still ticking. We were hoping against hope that she was still alive. And so with this in mind, agents as well as police officers who had not slept in 2 or 3 days were up searching, looking, hoping that she was still alive.
Then, investigators got the call they'd been hoping for. The FBI emergency response team, working at the second motel, had spotted Bruce Webster pull up in his car. The suspected kidnapper had returned to the motel with a young woman, but she was not Lisa Renee. A brief interview revealed she was not connected to the crime in any way.
You're not in any trouble. It's going to be okay, okay? Just let me call him.
He had driven up into the parking lot. Our officers and the FBI agents confronted him. He identified himself as Bruce Webster, gave date of birth information. He was carrying a small baggie of what appeared to be marijuana in his pocket. He was asked if we could search his vehicle. He allowed the officers to search his vehicle that he'd driven up in.
Inside the vehicle, agents found 2 handguns. They charged Webster with possession of the guns and the marijuana and took him to the Garland County Jail in Hot Springs, Arkansas. The car was processed for other evidence. They found no trace of the missing girl.
And when they radioed us and told us he was in custody, we, myself, and Detective Ford went back and interviewed Bruce Webster. He stated that he didn't know anything. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply coming back to his motel room.
As Agent Floyd continued to pressure Webster for answers, the last of the fugitives, Orlando Hall, turned himself in.
Orlando Hall had apparently seen the news that these arrests had been made, found out, of course, that his brother had been taken into custody. He surrendered to the Pine Bluff Police Department.
With all 4 suspects now in custody, agents hoped that one of them would reveal where investigators could find Lisa Renee. The interview with Bruce Webster, the man who had been hired to do the killing, continued into the night, but he said little. Agent Floyd believed Webster had the answers they were looking for.
Basically, the only information Mr. Webster provided was his name, the fact that he hadn't done anything, and the fact that he wanted to go to sleep. To him, it was nothing. She was nothing.
Agents' hope of finding Lisa alive was fading. They needed to get one of the suspects to talk, and they needed to do it fast. Six days after a young woman was abducted from her Arlington, Texas apartment, investigators pressed her suspected kidnappers for information. Until now, alleged hitman Bruce Webster had stonewalled investigators. But Special Agent Garrett Floyd's persistence eventually paid off. Webster finally admitted that Lisa was dead.
It felt like a tremendous sledgehammer falling on you. We had tracked this young lady from Arlington, Texas to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, over 200 miles, with the one hope of finding her alive. And we did not. It was as if all of the wind and all of the energy had gone out of us.
Webster picked up the story where his accomplice Stephen Beckley left off. When they returned to the park with Lisa, they located the grave they had dug the day before. Detective John Stanton's fears had been realized.
The reality of it set in at that point that we were not going to find her alive. We were not going to be able to save her. We were going to be too late.
Stand by the car. Watch.
Webster said that only 2 of his accomplices, Orlando Hall and Stephen Beckley, took Lisa back to the park. The fourth kidnapper, Demetrius Hall, had stayed behind to clean the motel room and wipe away fingerprints. The suspected hitman claimed he wasn't actually with the others when they killed the girl. Webster said he returned to the car to act as the lookout. From the car, the grave was too far away to have seen the murder. Now that Webster was safely in custody, the agents decided to see if Beckley would corroborate his story. Agent Floyd felt that Beckley knew far more than he had said.
And he looked at me and he said, "You know I didn't tell you everything. You know I've lied." And I said, "Yes, I know you did not tell me everything. You didn't lie, but you didn't tell me everything." And he said, "You're right." So then Stephen Beckley started crying. And Stephen Beckley told me she was dead, that she was buried in these woods, and that we needed to go get her. And I said, "We will go get her. Let's get your story on paper, and we will go and find her."
Crazy, man. He's a hitman.
Beckley said that despite Bruce Webster's story, the hitmen had indeed been involved in the killing.
He told us a story that the grave was 6 foot deep, and that when she went to the grave, when she, Bruce Webster, Orlando Hall, and he, Stephen Beckley, arrived at the grave, that she saw the grave, and that she started to run in the effort to get away. And that they struck at her with a shovel and placed a mark in this tree. That he, Beckley, became concerned and was afraid and ran back up to the street to check to see if the way was clear, as he was instructed to by Bruce Webster. By the time he came back, they were burying her.
What you asked for?
Beckley told investigators that the men then met Demetrius back at the motel, showered, and left. They gave their dirty clothes to Webster, who burned them in the park, along with Lisa's blood-stained outfit. Webster stayed in Pine Bluff with Orlando Hall, while the other two returned to El Dorado. The agent re-interviewed Webster, hoping Beckley's confession would give him some leverage. The agent told him that Beckley had placed him at the murder scene and named the park where the body was buried.
He stated that he didn't know anything about anything. The last thing that I told him was, "Everyone else has told me what has occurred. Why won't you?" And he said, "They're family, aren't they?" I said, "Yeah, the family has turned on you." He said, "Open that book. Let me tell you what happened."
The hitman now confessed that he was, in fact, at the murder scene. He admitted that he had dug the grave, and he offered to show it to the agent.
So in the middle of the night, we drove back to Pine Bluff and told him I need as many flashlights and officers and agents available, that we were going to find her tonight.
Webster showed investigators the area of the park where the body was buried. They searched for evidence to corroborate the suspect's stories. By morning, they found the gravesite. They began to process the area and exhume the body. The site was as the hitman had described it, right down to a damaged tree near the grave.
And we removed a section of that tree because it was evidence that the shovel that they were hitting her with had actually missed on one of their swings and hit the tree. So we used that tree as a part of the evidence.
Unearthing the body was a time-consuming and heartbreaking process. Besides digging, investigators sifted through leaves and dirt, searching for anything that might help tie the suspects to the crime. Joel Stevenson of the Arlington, Texas Police recalls the moment when their hard work finally paid off.
We made contact with Lisa's body approximately 2 feet down from the surface, the outer surface of the dirt, and then started uncovering her and really excavating around the body from that point on down to the 4 feet level. This lasted for about 5.5 hours. It took us to fully extract her from the gravesite.
When they reached the dead woman's body, it was an emotional moment for investigators who wanted so desperately to save Lisa Renee.
During the time we're exhuming her body, one of the agents on the evidence response team accidentally scrapes her knee. The agent breaks down, and I break down, because we know now that she's dead. This week that we have spent trying to locate her has resulted in the recovery of her, but not the recovery of her in that she was not alive.
The coroner removed Lisa's body to the Arkansas State Lab in Little Rock, where an autopsy was performed. She had ligature marks on her arms, defensive wounds on her hands, bruises over much of her body, and deep lacerations to the back of her head. But the cause of death was determined to be suffocation, coupled with blunt force trauma to the head. The coroner believed Lisa's attackers knocked her unconscious with a shovel and then buried her alive.
When you find out that you were that close to possibly saving this kidnapped victim from her demise, as it turned out, it hurts in that you wish you could kind of go back in time and do something different than you did. But under the conditions that we had and the information we had to work with, we felt like we did as good as we could. Unfortunately, it wasn't good enough to save Lisa.
The 4 kidnappers were tried soon after her body was found. Demetrius Hall became a witness for the state and accepted a plea bargain of 25 years. Stephen Beckley did the same and got 30 years. Orlando Hall received the death penalty for interstate kidnapping resulting in death. A few months later, Bruce Webster received the same sentence. Both were sent to death row at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. The trials were little consolation to Lisa's sister Pearl, who could barely absorb the fact that the bright teenager would never realize her dream of becoming a surgeon.
I thought I'd feel better, but I really don't. Because, I mean, it's not going to bring her back. The only thing that's going to make it better is Lisa was here today, and she's not coming back.
For Arlington Police Detective John Stanton, Lisa Renee's murder had disturbing implications.
It just solidified the fact that things can happen to people who are completely and totally unrelated to criminal activities. No one is exempt from the possibility that, for no real reason of their own, they get put in a position where their life is in jeopardy. And Lisa Renee is a prime example of someone that, in the years that I've been doing this, she is actually probably the most innocent victim that I've ever worked a case on. And it's something that we'd all need to remember, that even if you're an innocent victim, you can still be a victim.
For Special Agent Garrett Floyd and investigators alike, the case was personal.
I have a daughter who's approximately the same age as Lisa Renee. And to believe that someone could take a child, a young lady, and do the things that they did to her and then kill her without any respect for life takes that father image in me to a different level. because we love our children. And we know that we will have to take care and keep them out of harm's way. And on a Saturday night, if my daughter's doing homework and I happen to run to the store, they could break in my house and take my daughter and do the same thing.
A young girl set out to run an errand for her mother. As the minutes ticked by, it became clear she did not simply wander off. With no clues to her whereabouts, local authorities called in the FBI to help. Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was going only a few blocks, but the search for her would spread to 3 states.
Every parent faces the question, when is a child old enough to leave the house alone? For mother in Tucson, her 8-year-old daughter's bike ride to the corner mailbox turned into a 2-month nightmare. Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI can enter a case after 24 hours. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It would take dozens of agents working in 2 states to track down a paroled sex offender. But it would take a mother's courage to change the laws that released a monster.
Monday, September 17th, 1984. At around 3 in the afternoon in Flowing Wells, Arizona, outside Tucson, 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, just home from school, was helping her mom send a belated birthday card to her aunt. Because her big sister was staying late at school for track practice, Vicki asked her mom if she could mail the card by herself. The mailbox was little more than 2 blocks away. After telling her daughter to be back before 3:30, Debbie Carlson gave her consent to her elated youngest daughter. According to Mrs. Carlson, the trip to the mailbox and back would take less than 10 minutes.
I sent Vicki by herself, which was the first time I'd ever sent any one of my children by themselves to run an errand. We always used the buddy system.
Little Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was on her first big solo adventure. According to her mother, she beamed with pride over the responsibility she had been given. She promised to come right home after mailing the card. About 20 minutes after Vicki left, Debbie Carlson was reassured by the sound of the front door.
Stephanie?
And a little surprised to see that it was Vicki's older sister, Stephanie.
Do me a favor, go look for your sister.
Her track practice had been canceled.
Vicki went down in the mailbox.
Mrs. Carlson told her that Vicki went out to mail a letter but hadn't returned. Stephanie thought her sister might be playing with a friend.
Stephanie goes, oh, I'll go look for her. She probably stopped at Jennifer's house. So Stephanie, the second time in one day, I sent one of my kids without the buddy system.
Stephanie found Vicki's bike lying on the side of the road.
Vicki!
She called her little sister's name.
Vicky!
She hurried home to tell her mom.
Well, right away, that was an antenna for me because Vicky would have never left her bike in the middle of the street. That was her pride and joy. She took care of that bike like it was, a prized possession.
Debbie Carlson drove to the spot with her daughter to collect Vicky's bike.
Vicky!
Stephanie checked the house nearby to see if anyone had seen her little sister.
Vicky!
No one answered. Shortly after loading Vicky's abandoned bike into the car, Mrs. Carlson was overwhelmed by emotion.
I was on my way back home. I just uncontrollably started crying. It was like I knew something was wrong. It just was so out of character. Something was wrong.
All right. When's the last time you seen your dog?
Mrs. Carlson called the Pima County Sheriff's Office. She also called Mr. Carlson home from work. The little girl had been missing less than 90 minutes, but concern within the community grew quickly.
Everybody's reaction was the same, that there was something wrong. There was something not right with the situation.
Debbie Carlson provided photos of Vicky to deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Police retraced her route to see where she might have encountered trouble. Her destination was the mailbox in front of a convenience store near a busy intersection, only a few blocks away from her home.
Yes, sir. How you doing? Okay, Tom Kernan.
A deputy asked the manager if he'd seen the 8-year-old.
Have you seen this girl? Have you seen her? Do you recognize her?
The manager recognized her from previous visits, but hadn't seen her that day.
Have you seen her in the last, say, hour or 2 hours?
Deputies also canvassed the surrounding neighborhood. They checked first at her best friend's house. Mrs. Spencer said that neither she nor her daughter had seen Vicky that day. Then her 5-year-old son spoke up.
Have you seen Vicky?
He said Vicky had stopped by earlier looking for Jennifer.
Hey, is Jennifer home?
After he told her she wasn't home, Vicky rode off toward her house, apparently having already mailed her card. As the little boy finished his story, 2 older boys approached the deputy. They said they'd also seen Vicky riding away from the convenience store. Just minutes before they rode past her, they saw a small black car with California plates. It was moving so slowly they passed it on their bikes. They said it was heading in Vicky's direction, but they didn't wait to see if it passed her. And they never noticed the driver. A slow-moving out-of-state car, appearing at around the same time Vicky vanished, struck the investigators as suspicious. Although it simply may have been someone's guest looking for a house number, the sheriff had to consider the possibility that the little girl could have been abducted. Authorities take a case like this very seriously. They've learned to expect and brace for the worst. The sheriff called in homicide detective Gary Damers.
The sheriff decided that it was important to have the homicide detail handle this particular case because of the disappearance of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. It was felt that she had been abducted and that we were looking at a case that could eventually become a homicide case. So we were called out a little earlier than usual.
A few hours later, a command center was set up at the nearby elementary school, which was closed for the day. It became the clearinghouse for any information, any leads. As word of Vicky's disappearance spread, there was no trouble finding volunteers to man the phones.
That's correct.
The calls poured in.
With that, we would like to get some amplified.
Sheriff's deputies, along with hundreds of volunteers, organized a search of the area. They systematically moved out in concentric circles from Vicky's last known sighting. They combed the fields for some sign of the girl. But none was found. Even the dogs couldn't pick up her scent.
You know, before you know it, the minutes turned into half hour into hour, and more law enforcement, more deputies started coming. People within the neighborhood started coming over, and everybody started looking for Vicky.
A deputy remained at the house should new information come available or a ransom call be made. Hours passed with no word. The only calls were from concerned friends and family.
No, they don't.
In terms of news, there was still nothing.
Okay.
Still,
thank you.
no Vicky. Under the federal kidnapping statute, the Pima County Sheriff's Department was empowered to ask the FBI to enter the case. On day 2 of Vicky's disappearance, Special Agent Larry Bagley from the FBI's Tucson field office took the assignment.
The evidence was simply that a young child who was very responsible left home, and her bicycle is found in the middle of the street, and she never returned home. And that was enough to trigger our entry under the kidnapping statute.
In the case of a missing child, chances for a safe return increase when immediate action is taken. The FBI had the power to extend the investigation beyond the state of Arizona if necessary. The agent's participation gave Debbie Carlson hope for a quick resolution. A few blocks away at the command center in the elementary school, deputies and volunteers continued to work the phones. By now, it seemed that all of Tucson knew about the disappearance of the 4-foot-tall, 60-pound girl with auburn hair. And it seemed like everyone was calling.
Okay. Thank you.
Some were pranksters, some merely misinformed. All had to be answered, filtered, and processed. Finally, among the dozens of hopeful but futile tips and leads, one call held a glimmer of hope. A woman called to report that she thought she saw Vicki Lynn Hoskinson at the mall the previous evening.
Hi, can I please
She was a
speak to
clerk at a
detective?
toy store.
No, I
She
want
told
this.
authorities that a woman in a wide-brimmed hat came in with an upset little girl who looked like Vicki Lynn to her. The woman tried to placate the child with a toy. She paid cash for the purchase, pulling it out of an envelope. The clerk also noticed that she carried a shopping bag from another store in the mall. After paying, the two left, arguing over what to have for dinner. The clerk agreed to come to the command center to provide a sketch. From her description, a police artist created a composite drawing of the customer.
What about her nose?
It was their first real lead. From the way the woman was described treating the girl, investigators believe she may have lost a child and was trying desperately to replace it with someone else's. While it was reassuring to think that Vicky was being cared for by her abductor, the theory had some nagging inconsistencies for Agent Bagley.
It was pretty unlikely to me that someone would have taken Vicki Lynn and then taken her to a public place and to be seen with her. That and the fact that Debbie said that Vicki Lynn would never knowingly accompany a stranger in public and not try to get away.
But perhaps Vicky did not run from the woman because she was not a stranger to the child. Investigators returned to Vicky's neighborhood, hoping that someone would recognize the sketch and provide a name.
Give me a call. I sure will.
They found no one who could.
Sure will. Yeah, thank you. You guys have a good day.
A number of leads that identified, or people believe they identified this woman, were telephoned into the command post, and each one of those leads were followed up by an investigator or a detective.
Ma'am? Excuse me.
Investigators canvassed the mall, including the store whose shopping bag the woman had carried.
This is Officer Nolan from the Sheriff's Department. Look at this sketch.
The clerk there recognized the woman, remembering that a little girl was with her, and even commenting that the woman had worn a wide-brimmed hat which wasn't included in the sketch. As new witnesses came forward, all of Tucson held its breath with the hope that Vicki Lynn Hoskinson would be found alive. By the second day of the search for 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, the news coverage was extensive. Local and national news teams broadcast hourly updates. Though Vicki was reportedly seen in the Tucson Mall the night before, arguing with a strange woman, it seemed implausible to agents and deputies that if Vicki were still alive, her abductor would have taken her to a public place. Investigators continued to search in nearby rural areas. They also continued to prepare themselves and Vicki's mother, Debbie Carlson, for the worst.
I remember them coming in and the second day on Tuesday and wanting access to Vicki's room. You know, they made us close up her room and they started taking hair samples from her bed. They took her sheets, they took her pillow, they took her hairbrush. They took all these things and almost like, you know, they were preparing a homicide case is basically was what they were doing. And I was not real receptive to that, you know, because in my mind, this was not going to be a homicide case.
Despite their doubts, investigators continued to pursue their only lead. They needed to identify the woman in the mall whom a witness believed had abducted Vicki.
We're gonna go get something to eat.
At the nearby high school, a student thought he recognized the woman's face. He said he saw the woman with the little girl in a dark-colored car the previous afternoon. He recalled the car was a black Monte Carlo. A little girl who resembled Vicki was looking out of the window. He believed that the woman driving was the same one depicted in the sketch. Investigators wondered if it was the same car seen earlier in the neighborhood by the two boys on the bikes.
Okay.
The Monte Carlo that was seen was a lead for us because it sounded like it had a great deal of potential, but there wasn't much we could do with it. We did look for Monte Carlos and had got no hits with that.
At the command center, witnesses of all ages were coming forward. A mother came in with her 3-year-old.
Couldn't have been more.
She helped her son describe to investigators what he had seen the day before. They lived across the street from where Vicki Lynn's bike was found. Earlier that afternoon, she told the detective her son was playing in the front yard. While she went into the house for just a moment, the boy said he saw a little girl on a pink bike being knocked down by what he called a black race car. He said a big girl with long hair got out of the car and helped the little girl in. Then they drove off. This little boy had apparently witnessed the abduction of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. His portrayal of events rekindled suspicions that Vicki may have been abducted by the woman from the mall. But he was too young to give any more useful details. And his mother hadn't seen or heard anything. Agents checked the spot where Vicki Lynn's bike had been found to see if anything had been overlooked. Agent Bagley made a crucial find. Something that hadn't been reported earlier.
There was a fresh gouge on the post about 16 or 18 inches above the ground, which was not the contact point for a large car. So it looked to me like it was fresh. It certainly appeared to me that perhaps the car that had hit the bicycle had run into this post.
He surmised that the small black car with California plates spotted just yards away could have been the car that struck the post at that height.
There's no evidence of
The agent asked if any other investigators had received reports of a black out-of-state car in the area.
Witnesses, I interviewed 2 young boys.
One detective had. Earlier that day, he had taken a statement from Sam Hall, the coach at the elementary school. Hall reported seeing a suspicious vehicle at the schoolyard at about 3 o'clock on September 17th, just 20 minutes before Vicki was last seen in the neighborhood. He said he first noticed a low black car with California tags, driving slowly near the schoolyard. Then he noticed that the driver was watching the children at play. He described the driver as male, with long hair and a beard. Hall told Detective Damers that when he looked at the stranger's face, a chill went up and down his spine.
He described it as his hair raising on the back of his neck when he saw this individual. So he kept a close eye on this subject.
As the man began to drive off, Hall had the presence of mind to jot down his license number. The next day, when the gym teacher had heard that Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was missing, he believed that his sighting might be relevant.
When we obtained the license number from Sam Hall and heard his story, it got me pretty excited because this was probably the break we were looking for.
It would take several hours for the FBI to trace the license number to the car's owner. Investigators were uncertain if there was any connection between the strange woman at the mall and the bearded man in the car.
Each investigator in this case was highly charged with emotion because every hour that passes makes the likelihood that Vicki Lynn would be recovered safely, it diminished with every hour.
Time conspired against them, and hope for Vicki Lynn's safe return began to falter as day 2 came to a close. September 19th, 1984. Day 3 in the hunt for Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. While the license plate for the small black car was being traced, investigators continued collecting statements from potential witnesses. Another neighborhood woman came in
tell me
to
what
describe
happened
how
in the
her
laundry?
child was almost abducted. The woman told investigators that she'd been doing laundry in her apartment building. While she was busy with the machine, a woman came in and tried to lure her child away. The mother managed to drive her off.
Leave us alone.
Sketch right here.
Police showed the witness their sketch of the woman from the shopping mall.
Was this the lady?
No.
Is that her?
The drawing did not look like the woman who grabbed her boy,
She was a little
but the mother couldn't be sure.
That's
Police canvassed the area and found the woman in question. She was a fixture in the neighborhood. Eccentric, but ultimately harmless.
Have you ever seen this child?
She was released. Another one of 200 or so dead ends that investigators pursued. Each one meant dashed hopes. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Carlson held a press conference with her family. She pleaded for Vicky's safe return. By reaching out to millions of people through the evening news, she hoped someone would come forward with information on her young daughter's whereabouts.
One minute I had hope they were going to find her, and the next minute I was waiting for them to walk through the door and tell me they found her body. And it was a roller coaster. It's like, am I going to be having a funeral in 3 days? Am I going to have my daughter in my arms in 3 days? Is she going to be one of those missing kids that is missing forever?
The FBI was inching closer to the answer. The trace on the license plate led to a 28-year-old Los Angeles man named Frank Jarvis Atwood. Agents gave the information to the FBI Identification Division to check for priors.
About 10 o'clock that evening, we received by fax a rap sheet from the Identification Division, and that about blew our mind because we noticed that there was a prior conviction for child molestation and another for kidnapping.
Frank Atwood was currently out on parole in California. Arizona FBI alerted agents there. They decided not to tell the Carlsons until they knew more. The following morning, day 4 in the case of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, agents went to the LA address where Atwood's vehicle was registered. It was the home of Atwood's parents, retired Army Brigadier General Frank Atwood Sr. and his wife.
Who's Atwood? Mr. Atwood. I'd like to ask you.
The Atwoods acknowledged that their son had committed crimes in the past. They also told investigators that he had visited a few days earlier, but they didn't know where he was now. Agents told them that he might be involved in the kidnapping of a child, and time was of the essence.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give you my business card.
Neither parent had any information to
I'll
share.
leave it right here on the table. If he does get in contact with either one,
Agents left their business cards in case the Atwoods learned anything new.
The mother was very protective of him, and the father listened to the pleas that perhaps if we acted soon enough, that perhaps Vicki Lynn might be recovered alive.
A few hours after the agents left, the Atwoods received a call. It was their son, Frank. He needed their help. He said his car had broken down in Texas and he needed money wired to him so he could get it fixed. His mother took down the address and told him not to worry. His father copied it and left the house.
I need to tell you that my son
He went to a payphone and called the FBI.
at Chuck's garage.
He gave them the address of the garage in Kerrville, Texas, where his son Frank and a friend awaited money for a new transmission. The California office called agents in Arizona, who in turn called agents in Texas with a request to apprehend Frank Atwood. The Texas Bureau called the garage.
Yeah.
The manager confirmed that Atwood was there with one other man. He didn't see anyone else with them. He did not know if Atwood was armed. Agents asked him to stall the fugitive until an arrest team arrived. The wheels were set in motion for the arrest of Frank Atwood. There was one more call that Agent Bagley wasn't sure he should make.
The problem is whether or not to let the parents know that we have a good lead on this. It's breaking extremely fast. We're worried about whether Vicki Lynn is with him in that car, and all sorts of things go through your mind.
Ultimately, they decided to inform the Carlsons of this sudden turnabout in the case of their missing daughter. The story was too big to keep under wraps for much longer.
They came over before the arrest was made, and they briefed us that they were about to make an arrest in another state. And it was going to be on the TV, and basically they briefed us on the situation, who they were going to be arresting. There was no signs of Vicki. They had him under surveillance.
Without any idea about where the little girl might be, or even if she were still alive, federal agents moved in to arrest Frank Atwood for kidnapping.
Stay out here, sir. Cigarettes?
4 days after Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared from Arizona, the FBI made an arrest in Kerrville, Texas. Frank Atwood and his traveling companion James McDonald were picked up without incident at an auto repair garage and held for suspected kidnapping. There was no sign of Vicki. Gary Damers of the Tucson Sheriff's Department headed to Texas to interrogate him.
He told us that he would speak to us about certain things, and there are certain things that he would not speak to us about. Some of the information that he provided was that he, in fact, was in the Tucson area.
On Romero Street.
Atwood's history of child molesting and kidnapping made him a likely suspect in the case. Atwood admitted to being in Vicki's neighborhood on Monday, September 17th, the day she disappeared. He said he'd been staying in a nearby park. At about 3 o'clock, he left to buy drugs and returned to the park 2 hours later, around 5 p.m. He wouldn't account for his whereabouts during those 2 lost hours. He claimed he was not responsible for Vicki's disappearance. James McDonald corroborated Atwood's story. On the day in question, he told investigators that he and Atwood had had an argument in the park at about 3 o'clock. Just after that, Atwood left in his car for about 2 hours. McDonald said that when Atwood returned around 5 o'clock, he had blood on his hands and clothing. Atwood told him he'd gotten into a fight with a drug dealer and stabbed him.
Get anything off him?
McDonald also gave authorities the names of other people in Tucson that he and Atwood hung around with. Most were transients.
September 17th.
Officially, focus shifted away from the mysterious woman at the mall and centered on Atwood. But Debbie Carlson didn't want to entirely give up on the mall lady theory.
At first, I really wanted to stick to that theory, that it was probably a woman possibly who'd lost a child, was trying to replace the child. And I think that's what kept me going that first week, was that possibly it was would be someone who would be taking care of her.
Though Mrs. Carlson held out hope, investigators were less optimistic about a happy ending.
Hey, Mom, I love you. I love you too.
When he was arrested and she wasn't with him, the reality really started to set in, that those last words, "I love you," were the last words I was going to hear my daughter say to me.
While the FBI scrambled for a warrant to search Atwood's car, agents and Arizona authorities returned to Tucson the next day to track down the other park dwellers mentioned by McDonald. Investigators found 2 men who said that Atwood had spent a few nights in their trailer. One of the men, known as Mad Dog, recalled seeing him there Monday night, the night of Vicky's disappearance. His story supported what Atwood's traveling companion Jim McDonald told the FBI.
McDonald said that he had observed Atwood on Monday afternoon with bloody clothes and blood on his knife and on his boots. Mad Dog said the same thing separately, that he had observed the same thing at his trailer, and that they had even discussed that Atwood should get rid of his bloody clothes and the knife.
Agents presented a warrant and searched the trailer for any evidence that might suggest kidnapping or murder. Initially, it looked as if the search proved fruitful. They collected a blanket that appeared to be blood-stained, along with a hairbrush believed to be Atwood's. Both were subjected to a battery of blood and fiber tests. Both revealed nothing. Atwood's clothes and knife were never found. The search continued, both for evidence against Atwood and for some trace of the victim.
FBI agents and detectives, including myself, continued to search for Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. There was a certain amount of frustration that had set in because we were unable to locate her. The area is vast. It's a lot of desert, and trying to use all the investigative skills available, we had been unable to locate her. But we continued to pursue any type of lead.
Though clues to Vicky's whereabouts were scarce, detectives continued to canvass the park where Atwood had spent most of his time while in Tucson. Agents found a couple who knew Frank Atwood. They also claimed to have seen the suspect in blood-stained clothes the day Vicky disappeared. Like the others, Atwood told them that he had stabbed a double-crossing drug dealer. While that was certainly possible, the timing of the knifing, exactly at the time of Vicky's disappearance, seemed to stretch coincidence. Though investigators now had corroborating stories that suggested Atwood's guilt, they still had no physical evidence and no body. To prove that Vicky had been in his car, they needed to match some hair or fiber from the car with ones collected from the victim's bedroom. It didn't turn out that way.
We didn't get a hair or fibers or blood that we could identify. During that time, and even at this time, the best forensic experts in the country were at the FBI, and they were the ones that processed the vehicle. So I truly believe that if there was something in there that could have been found, it would have been found.
What agents were looking for wasn't inside the car, but rather outside it. FBI examiners lifted a sample of paint from Vicky's bike to compare to a speck of pink paint found on Atwood's front bumper. The paint speck, just a few millimeters wide, was tested at the FBI's Materials Analysis Unit. The examiner first assigned the case passed away shortly after completing the tests. Former Special Agent Examiner James Corby would re-examine the minute evidence.
Usually, the victim of a crime, you have no association with the victim or the family, and we work so many of those cases that you try not to get involved, but it's very, very difficult when a crime involves a baby or a small child, somebody that's defenseless, and you find yourself, I think, working harder to try to establish something in the case. But if it's not there, I mean, it's not there. But you certainly, I think, take a more critical look at that case, and I think it's human nature.
In microscopic and chemical tests, Corby determined the bicycle's paint and the paint found on the bumper matched. Corby also found chrome plating from the bumper smeared on the bike.
So what we have here is an interchange of materials. The paint from the victim's bicycle was on the suspect's car. The plating from the suspect's car is on the victim's bicycle. And this interchange of materials establishes contact between the bicycle and the suspect's vehicle.
It was good, but without a body, it would not be enough to charge Frank Atwood Jr. with the murder of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. Authorities braced themselves for a difficult case with few witnesses, few visible clues, and no body. The case against Atwood could easily slip through any one of those cracks. Almost 3 weeks after little Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared off a street in her Tucson neighborhood, Frank Atwood Jr. was arrested in Texas and charged with kidnapping. Vicki was still missing and presumed dead. Investigators knew that if her body was not recovered, prosecution for murder would be next to impossible. The Tucson community, living this nightmare day by day, soon learned that Atwood had slipped through the cracks before. Atwood was currently on parole after serving 3 years of a 5-year sentence after a child molestation charge involving a 7-year-old boy was plea bargained down to abduction. The enraged citizens of Tucson marched in the streets behind Vicki's family to protest lenient laws against convicted child molesters. Most wore yellow ribbons to show their faith in Vicki's safe return. Atwood fought extradition from Texas to Arizona. With no evidence that Vicki had been taken across state lines, the FBI dropped its federal charges against Frank Atwood. But state charges of kidnapping still held. In November, more than a month since Vicki's disappearance, Atwood returned to Arizona under heavy guard to stand trial for kidnapping. Bail was denied.
And I remember the day that they says, oh, you know, it will take probably at least 6 months. And I'm thinking, 6 months? Get out of here. You're crazy. Little did we know it was going to take almost 3 years.
On December 3rd, 1984, a clean-shaven Frank Jarvis Atwood Jr. pled not guilty at his arraignment. Due to publicity, the judge ordered Atwood's trial to be moved from Tucson to Phoenix. Jury selection would prove long and arduous, taking almost 6 weeks. But the case continued to unfold. On April 12, 1985, a woman walking her dog just off the main road found a small human skull in the desert northwest of Tucson.
We immediately cordoned off the area. The FBI was called in to assist. We systematically worked the area. What had happened was that the body had been scattered. The animals had actually gotten to it and had moved a number of parts around, and we just took our time. I think we were out there for 5 days collecting everything that we could possibly get out of that area.
About 100 people meticulously scoured a 20-square-mile stretch of desert. Investigators photographed the entire area to record the condition of the location. Forensic technicians marked areas where evidence was to be collected. In a case with so little physical evidence, overlooking the smallest bone fragment might prove costly. 12 hours a day for 5 days, authorities recovered and recorded bone fragments, their location, and their condition. Over 20 bags of evidence were delivered to the lab for identification in late May of 1985, including a portion of lower mandible that still held teeth. A witness came forward who testified to seeing Atwood arrive in the area with a child, then leave alone. The coroner found that weathering on the bones was consistent with 8 months' exposure to the elements. Dental records proved these were the remains of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson.
You know, they found the lower mandible and a gopher hole. 1 year later, one of the search and rescue people that searched for her remains had taken a bouquet of flowers and put it in that gopher hole where she found the lower mandible. Vicki Lynn affected a lot of people. These are people who never knew her as the vibrant tomboy little girl that we had. And I don't think anyone who lived here during that time will ever forget how this community came together because of her.
Vicki's family laid her to rest on May 30th, 1985. "500 mourners attended her funeral. The community was outraged that the life of one of its youngest members was cut so short. Debbie Carlson vowed that her daughter's death would have significance for the living.
I became very politically active to help fight for children's issues. And we got a couple laws changed in the state of Arizona. And I think that was my saving grace because it gave me some focus. It gave me a focus away from the pain and the gut wrench and the tearing at my heart that I felt every second to I was doing something positive for Vicki and for other kids. That my daughter was not going to die in vain. She was going to make a difference.
Frank Atwood was indicted for first-degree murder. On March 26, 1987, 2.5 years after Vicki disappeared, he was found guilty. Frank Atwood was sentenced to death. But a case like this is never truly over. 16 years later, memories of hope and despair still linger.
I'll never forget the sound of a helicopter. To this day, when I hear a helicopter, I remember those days. I remember the smell of the air, the time of the year, and the noise of a helicopter.
After an officer was gunned down at point-blank range, a psychotic killer led investigators across the Midwest. No one knew where the gunman would strike next, even as his tally of murders and abductions grew. The FBI and state police raced against time to rescue America's heartland from this deranged gunman.
A small town without any crime was turned inside out by the arrival of one dangerous stranger. Some killers are cold and calculating. Others are impulsive, unpredictable, and hard to pin down. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. To flush out this killer required a SWAT team and a profiler who determined he would not surrender without a fight.
At 8 a.m. on Monday morning, September 22nd, 1986, a U.S. parole officer made his way to the home of a parolee in a lower middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Indianapolis, Indiana. It was a routine visit scheduled a week earlier. U.S. probation officer Thomas Gall needed to get a urine sample from an ex-convict to check for illicit drugs. "40-year-old Michael Wayne Jackson had been released from federal prison 5 months earlier on weapons charges. He also had a history of substance abuse and severe paranoid schizophrenia. The parolee was reluctant to allow Gall to enter, but the officer insisted. Moments later, a neighbor heard shouting coming from Jackson's house. He saw the officer run out the door. Jackson followed him, firing a sawed-off shotgun into his back. The final shot was at point-blank range. The neighbor called police as he watched to see what Jackson might do next. He told the 911 operator that the ex-convict re-emerged, still carrying the shotgun. But now he was wearing a dark trench coat and heading for his green pickup truck. Indianapolis police raced to the killer's home, hoping to catch him before he got far. The neighbor added that Jackson also had on canvas sneakers and jeans as he watched Jackson leave the neighborhood. Jackson escaped before police could arrive. The police called in the FBI since the probation officer was a federal official. "39-year-old Thomas Gall had been killed instantly from the shot to his head. FBI Special Agent Jack Osborne of the Indianapolis Field Office was assigned the case.
When I arrived at the Jackson residence, the victim was still at that scene. We had dispatched numerous agents and numerous police were in the area. We were in the process of identifying any witness we had so that they could be spoken to by the police department and also by an agent.
The eyewitness who had called 911 described Jackson's behavior as having become increasingly erratic.
At what time did you see the offense?
The neighbor said he had seen Jackson outside more than once, talking to himself in a loud and agitated manner. Agents called the parole office to learn more about Jackson's background.
While he was in prison the previous year, he had been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic with antisocial personality and was to check in through the Indianapolis mental health facility and receive monthly medication for that illness, and they were afraid that he was not taking his medication.
Evidence technicians marked the positions of 3 12-gauge shotgun shells found close to the parole officer's body. Thomas Gall had been shot 3 times, the last one proving fatal. On the job for 11 years, the Vietnam veteran was the first federal parole officer killed in the line of duty. Thomas Gall left a young family and many friends.
I knew Tom pretty well. I knew his family, knew of his wife, knew that he had 2 kids, knew that he had been in the Marine Corps, had spent a year in Vietnam. We had talked about that a little bit. He was an extremely likable person, was extremely knowledgeable and caring, and it was hard working the case and keeping distance because of that closeness.
The inside of Jackson's house was described by officers as unfit for human habitation. Amongst the refuse, searchers discovered the shirt spattered with blood that Jackson wore at the time of the shooting and had since stripped off. Trash and animal droppings were scattered everywhere. There was no electricity or running water. On a counter in the kitchen, investigators found a hacksaw. They also discovered a sawed-off stock and barrel of a shotgun, likely from the murder weapon Jackson was presumably still carrying. As investigators were processing the house, an alert came across the police radio.
All right, we're on our way.
5 miles away, witnesses had reported another homicide. Just 20 minutes after the parole officer was shot, a second man had been killed at a convenience store by a shotgun blast, and a third man had been abducted. Agents interviewed a witness who described the shooter as having bushy hair, a beard, and wearing a dark trench coat. The woman added that the killer was wearing a bizarre disguise.
Witnesses at the JB Market indicate as a subject enters that market, he's carrying a shotgun, but he's got something on his face. The witnesses believe that it's grease and probably some spray paint that is in his hair and his beard, which really was a strange look.
Agents were convinced it was Jackson. The witness described that at 8:20 a.m., the armed man with a silver face burst inside demanding money.
Don't anybody move! You! Get the hell out! You! Get back there! You! Get behind there! Get the money out! Get the money! Come on, hurry up, old man!
Panicked, the owner struggled to open the register, but the gunman couldn't wait.
Hey, fat boy, get out of here!
Not wanting to leave empty-handed, the killer forced a bread delivery man to drive him from the scene in his bread truck. The witness didn't see which direction the bread truck was headed. Investigators revised the APB for Jackson to include the bread truck. Evidence technicians found a 12-gauge shell casing near the cash register, the same gauge and make as those found at the first murder scene. Buckshot from the victim was later removed to compare to samples removed from the probation officer. Detectives examined the pickup truck Jackson left behind. Inside, they found grease and a can of silver spray paint that was likely the source of Jackson's makeshift disguise.
We find that spray paint can in Jackson's truck. We're not sure why he sprays his face before he goes into the market after he had left his residence. We're surmising that he's trying to hide his identity, and he's doing that in this bizarre manner.
20 minutes later, agents received a call from the bread truck driver. Jackson had released him at the airport, unharmed. But the man told investigators the fugitive was still armed and on the move.
Jackson has taken another vehicle from the airport, again at gunpoint, and he drove up through the Speedway, Indiana area, had failed to pay for $10.50 worth of gas at a Speedway Sunoco station, and he was in a vehicle that is described to us, and there was a female in that vehicle.
Like the bread man, the woman was released shortly afterwards and called 911. But a second woman was not so lucky. At about 9 a.m., a young mother had returned to her suburban Indianapolis home following a shopping trip. As she unpacked her bags in the driveway, Michael Wayne Jackson emerged from a red pickup stolen at the airport.
Hey! Get over! Get over! Get in the car! Get in the car! Get!
She was Jackson's third hostage in less than an hour. Jackson held her captive for over 60 minutes, driving with a shotgun in his lap. She begged him to let her go, but he refused.
Shut your face!
There was no reasoning with the crazed fugitive.
She asked him about the disguise on his face, why his face was smeared with grease and oil and had paint on it, and he had no explanation for her, but did tell her that if she didn't comply with what he was telling her to do, that he would kill her.
The woman realized she had few options. When the car slowed, she jumped out. Jackson drove over her ankle, but she managed to roll free before she was injured further. The mother of one was treated at a local hospital for a broken ankle, where she reported the incident. She had escaped her kidnapper in Frankfort, Indiana, 40 miles northwest of Indianapolis. Once again, agents revised their APB. It now included her sedan, last seen traveling north from Frankfurt. Investigators struggled to predict Jackson's next move. They frantically gathered background information, trying to gain an edge.
Mike Jackson had a very extensive criminal background. In 1985 in Indianapolis, he was arrested and charged federally where he had homemade bomb devices in his vehicle and a homemade shotgun. For that, he received 1 year sentence in federal prison, and he was on 3 years parole for that violation during this time.
Jackson had also been in and out of mental institutions much of his life.
With some different looks.
Over the strong objections of his family, psychiatrists had recently released him from a treatment center since his schizophrenia had been stabilized by medication. But without supervision, Jackson had probably stopped taking his prescriptions.
Now, this was not really a picture.
And after 2 killings and 3 abductions in less than 2 hours, no one knew where Jackson was now.
We were in the process of sorting this out, as well as trying to notify all local state emergency people in the state of Indiana, as well as notifying other jurisdictions to help us try to locate Jackson. We knew what vehicle he last possessed in Frankfort, Indiana, and we hoped he was still in that vehicle and was not going to cause anyone else any harm anytime soon.
But authorities would be too late. At 10:15 a.m., Jackson decided he needed to change cars again. He barged into the Frankfort, Indiana home of a mother and child.
Don't move, kid! Get up!
Jackson ordered the woman to get her car keys or he would kill her and her son.
Get your purse! Get up, get up. Give me those keys.
She complied.
Give me those keys. Get, move! Move. Get your kid in the car!
In less than 2 hours, Jackson had kidnapped his 4th and 5th victims.
Go, move!
The killer was becoming bolder and more aggressive. Agents had to somehow find a way to catch him before his latest victims wound up dead. By 10:30 a.m. on September 22nd, 1986, 40-year-old Michael Wayne Jackson had murdered his parole officer and a grocery store clerk, then carjacked 5 other people, all in less than 2.5 hours. The FBI and Indiana police believed the killer was traveling north from Indianapolis, but his exact whereabouts and destination remained unknown.
Now, hurry up!
Armed with a sawed-off shotgun and his face painted silver, investigators believe Jackson was suffering from a psychotic episode after failing to take his medication.
Let's straight work.
The fugitive was last seen in Frankfort, Indiana, where he had abducted a mother and child from their home.
Get out of the car!
No one knew what he might do next.
Get out of the car! Get over here! Get over here!
Jackson drove his latest victims to a desolate area 8 miles from their home.
Give me that ring!
He stole the woman's wedding rings, then ordered them to the side of the road.
Move it! Move it! Move it! Don't you go anywhere!
Though the woman and her child survived unharmed, it was 20 minutes to the nearest phone before she could report the killer's last known whereabouts. At the FBI office in Indianapolis, 3 hours after Jackson's crime spree had begun, Special Agent Jack Osborne issued a federal murder warrant for the fugitive. But with so little information on his exact location, it would be difficult to prevent Jackson from striking again.
Up northwest of Indianapolis at Frankfort. So that's our last spot. So we now had Jackson leaving or driving away from the Frankfort, Indiana area, but really had no idea where he was headed, how he was going to get there, what route he was going to take, or if he might grab somebody else in the next few hours. So this is our 5th location.
Since Jackson's pattern of travel and crime was so random, agents expanded the search and alerted all FBI field offices in a 750-mile radius, which included Cleveland, Chicago, and St. Louis.
Let all of our offices know if we can get something out statewide, too, to all law enforcement agencies, particularly along Interstate 65 maybe now.
They also contacted the fugitive's mother in Jackson, Mississippi, but she had no idea where her son might be headed.
Frankfort area.
Investigators kept the media informed, too. By noon, Michael Wayne Jackson's photo was on every news program in the Indianapolis area. 6 hours later, the fugitive surfaced close to St. Louis. He had traveled 300 miles southwest to nearby O'Fallon, Missouri. Local officers received reports from 2 residents who had been carjacked by a silver-faced man with a shotgun. A description of their car with Missouri plates was added to the list of stolen vehicles as Jackson's most recent.
It's about a 5-hour drive from Indianapolis to St. Louis. So in the early evening of Monday, the 22nd of September, local and state law enforcement in Missouri, after they had received our APBs, are notifying the police department and our office that they believed Jackson to be in that area because he had attempted a kidnapping and a vehicle theft of a couple different people in that area.
On a rural road later that afternoon, a third O'Fallon resident was on his way home from work when he spotted his wife's car with the suspect at the wheel. The man was unaware that Jackson had killed 2 others that same day.
Hey!
The silver-faced man with bushy hair and a beard refused to stop. As the cars approached an intersection, the killer drew his weapon. At 7 p.m. that evening, the man reported that the shooter only hit the front of his car. He had returned home after the shooting to discover that his wife and father-in-law had been assaulted by the fugitive, but not seriously injured. Authorities now added the stolen blue sedan and its license plate to the APB for Jackson. It was the 7th vehicle carjacked in less than 12 hours.
We were glad to hear, I think, that we knew where he was. We were glad to hear that he hadn't harmed anyone else, and that we knew now that he had a different vehicle and that the St. Louis authorities, both federal, local, and state, were in the process of trying to get him located and stopped without getting anyone else hurt.
Yet despite the all-points bulletin, Jackson was nowhere to be found. Missouri State Highway Patrol officers responded to an accident near I-70 in O'Fallon, close to where the fugitive was last seen. A car had careened into a tree. The driver was pronounced dead at the scene. Given the darkness of the night, officers could not determine the extent of the man's injuries. Suspicious of the circumstances, the man's family ordered an autopsy. The medical examiner determined that the man had been shot in the head at close range through the driver's window with a 12-gauge shotgun. The same type of weapon Jackson had used to kill his parole officer and a grocery store owner. Examiners sent the buckshot to the Indiana State Police Lab so it could be compared to the others. It would take several days to learn the results. Area patrols stepped up surveillance in search of the armed fugitive. "10 miles away at around 7:30 p.m., a dark sedan with Texas plates pulled into a Wentzville, Missouri gas station. Jackson had carjacked his 8th vehicle and took its driver hostage. The attendant was unaware of the manhunt and didn't know what to make of the man with the silver face.
$10, please.
When the fugitive paid for the gas, the attendant noticed a shotgun in his lap and blood on his hands.
Thank you.
He immediately notified authorities, who once again changed the APB for Jackson. It now included the sedan with Texas plates. State and local officers rushed to the Wentzville area near Interstate 70. They needed to find the spree killer before he struck again. On September 22, 1986, the FBI continued to hunt for fugitive Michael Wayne Jackson, wanted for murdering 3 and carjacking 11 others in less than 12 hours. The silver-faced Jackson was last spotted at a Missouri gas station, armed with a sawed-off shotgun, driving a stolen dark sedan with Texas plates.
Thank you.
The passenger was the car's owner and was Jackson's latest hostage. It was impossible for authorities to know where Jackson might be headed, since his behavior had been so erratic after he stopped taking his antipsychotic medication. Wright City, Missouri police canvassed the interstate and local roads. At 9:15 p.m., Jackson was spotted alone in the stolen sedan by the town's police chief and a sergeant. Jackson seemed uncertain of what to do next. The chief radioed for reinforcements. They did not arrive in time. The sergeant was struck in the head. Jackson was long gone.
Yes, you all right? Sure.
The sergeant's injury was minor, so the chief gave chase, leaving him with a concerned witness. But the chief never caught up with the fugitive. 5 miles away, a pair of Missouri State Highway Patrol officers sighted the stolen sedan, abandoned on an interstate median. No one was inside, but the keys were still there. Officers then heard banging from within the trunk.
Cover it. Watch out.
They prepared for the worst.
Don't be there. Bill, take it easy. Right there. Hold. Push. Stay still. All right. Hold. Take it easy now.
They found only the terrified owner, traumatized but unhurt. His identification had been stolen, so police checked to be sure he was unarmed. He described his silver-faced kidnapper, armed with a sawed-off shotgun. He had no idea where the man had fled, but it appeared he had taken his gun since police did not find it in the car. The FBI and local police fanned out, not knowing which direction the fugitive had run, or if he had already carjacked his next victim. Despite hours of searching, they turned up no sign of the gunman, according to Special Agent in charge of the FBI in St. Louis, Hal Helteroff.
The night that Michael Wayne Jackson had abandoned his vehicle, we had the 2 sweeps on the south side of the interstate and the north side of the interstate the next morning. We were unable to flush him out of there. Then I determined that this was going to be a longer manhunt than I had expected. And at that point, I ordered in more FBI agents.
State and federal agents examined Jackson's last stolen vehicle. They noted the driver's side door had been pierced during the shootout with police. Since they did not find the slug, it appeared likely that Jackson had been hit in the ribs. The fact that Jackson fled the vehicle moments later could account for the lack of blood on the seat.
One theory was that he was injured and maybe went south of the interstate and laid down somewhere and either couldn't get up due to being injured or died.
A central command post was established in Wright City to coordinate the search efforts.
The vehicle that was taken there was recovered in O'Fallon, Missouri.
The area around the interstate encompassed thousands of acres of farmland and woods. To contain it would require hundreds of personnel, vehicles, and 24-hour roadblocks. For Missouri State Patrol Sergeant Don Bizzelli, no one would be safe until Jackson was found.
Information that we obtained from the Bureau about the background on Jackson made us more concerned for the safety of the citizens in Wright City and for the safety of our officers. He hadn't hesitated to shoot before, and he had already killed a law enforcement officer, the probation officer, and there was nothing that led us to believe that he'd stop.
Great. Have some information you'll need on that.
Authorities established a perimeter around Wright City, extending 5 miles in every direction. Residents in the town of 1200 awoke to find their community saturated with law enforcement, searching for an armed and unstable killer. With a homicide rate of 0 and little criminal activity of any kind, citizens were frightened. They were forced to lock their doors for the first time, and many kept their children home from school.
We had to start alerting the community that we had a suspect in the area that was very dangerous, and asked the people to keep us informed if they saw anybody matching Jackson's description. And it didn't take long for the word to get around, of course, in that small community, because our greatest fear was that he would take someone hostage.
The sprawling countryside was divided into mile-wide sectors. Search teams consisted of bloodhounds, SWAT members, FBI agents, and state police. Photos were distributed to searchers, and samples of Jackson's clothing were provided to the dogs to learn the killer's scent. Hundreds of occupied and abandoned buildings dotted the landscape. All would have to be searched. Over the next several days, many locations were explored more than once. It was a tedious and time-consuming process. Bloodhounds, known for their large jowls and long ears which stir minute scents towards their perceptive noses, found few signs of Jackson. At one building, searchers came across an abandoned campsite. But it appeared the cookware and old raincoat had been left behind by an itinerant laborer during the harvest season. Despite a week of searching, the teams found no evidence of Jackson's whereabouts.
We tried not to get frustrated. We tried to keep the morale up, saying today's the day, we're going to find him. It's the type of case that your troops are out there and they expect any minute that they're going to get a sighting on him, so that in itself just keeps you going.
Media did their part to keep the public informed. While the FBI and State Highway Patrol maintained 24-hour checkpoints on the 27 miles of roadways into and out of the Wright City area, they stopped each car that came through. One of the men they stopped claimed to be the fugitive's nephew. He said he had heard about the search and he wanted to help. He told them his uncle could survive on his own in the woods, and that it was possible that Jackson could be wearing body armor since he owned some.
Okay.
This might explain how Jackson survived a policeman's bullet that had likely hit his ribs.
We determined that from the use of dogs, we had tracking dogs and we had cadaver dogs come in, that we could not come up with a dead body Therefore, I was leaning toward the fact that he was still alive and well.
Area farmers tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, though remaining vigilant. A week into the manhunt, one woman spotted the bearded fugitive in his dark trench coat carrying a shotgun. She called police immediately, but the man disappeared before authorities arrived. 7 days after Michael Wayne Jackson had fled his Indiana home, the spree killer was still on the loose. The FBI knew that they had to find him before he found another victim. By September 28, 1986, a week had passed in the hunt for armed fugitive Michael Wayne Jackson, wanted for multiple murders, carjackings, and the wounding of a police officer. The 41-year-old criminal was last seen, armed and on foot, in the rural area of Wright City, Missouri. Despite a massive search, the FBI and local investigators had found no signs of the killer's whereabouts. The FBI considered the possibility that Jackson had stolen another car and somehow escaped the area. Desperate, they turned to FBI senior investigative profiler Ron Walker for help.
What they were simply asking for was my estimate, my prediction, I guess, of what he was going to do, what his continued acts were going to be, and where he was likely to go. And really more importantly for them at this period of time was, is he still in the area that they had been searching for 7 days?
Agent Walker analyzed Jackson's criminal and psychological history, as well as the reports from his current rampage. Since there were no new crimes recorded in the past week, the profiler concluded that Jackson had not yet left Wright City, Missouri.
Well, my opinion was that he was there, that he had probably become disoriented because of his paranoid kind of beliefs, his fear of being captured. He would avoid contact with people unless it would be to gain access to a vehicle to get out. And for that reason, I told him it was very important to maintain a very high profile, a high level of obvious police activity, because you don't want him to have the opportunity to think that he can get a way out by carjacking someone and getting a car and driving out of the area.
Since the fugitive was likely still in the area, the FBI called on the experience of tracker Bob Swabe from the Knoxville, Tennessee FBI field office. Swabe is best known for finding Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassin, James Earl Ray, after Ray's escape from a Tennessee prison in 1976. Agents hoped the renowned tracker could locate Jackson based on the minute signs he was trained to read.
Very seldom will you find a good footprint. You've got to learn to interpret the disturbance that's on the ground, and the little unusual thing like a leaf that is turned over or a stick that is just a small limb that has been stepped on and crushed or broken.
From decades of experience, Swabe can discern the difference between animal and human tracks through the depth of their imprint, the height at which branches or grass are disturbed around them, and their surface temperature. While animals often leave traces of their body heat after resting, humans' body heat is mostly absorbed by their clothing or shoes, preventing their heat from escaping. But since the hunt for Jackson had been so extensive, picking up his trail presented some unique challenges, even for the experienced tracker.
There had been so many people in there prior to us arriving on the scene. I mean, you know, that had I guess probably 200 or 300 police officers, law enforcement officers in this whole area searching before we ever arrived on the scene. So it made it more difficult.
Then, on September 29, 1986, a Wright City resident confirmed what the profiler had suspected. He reported that his guest house had been broken into. Nothing had been stolen, but he did find a broken mirror, used disposable razors, and an open can of soup. From the bathroom sink, evidence technicians recovered shaved hair, flecked with silver paint. It appeared that Jackson had once again changed his appearance. After 9 days of searching, agents feared Jackson may have slipped past patrols with his new appearance. Special Agent Jack Osborne took steps to alert the public at large.
Jackson was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list on October 1st so we could get some national exposure. Manhunt in St. Louis and the Wright City area had continued for numerous days. There were sightings, but we still didn't know for sure where he was, and we thought that added publicity with him being such a dangerous person is what would help get him located if he had left that St. Louis Wright City area.
On October 2nd, investigators returned to a building they had searched a week earlier. Camping gear that searchers had previously noticed was still there, but one item was now missing: a blue raincoat. They wondered if it was Jackson's and whether he had returned to claim it now that the nights were getting colder.
I felt that he was probably going to look for some abandoned outbuilding to hide in, just get out of the weather. You're dealing with a guy here who is who's been on the run, no food or water that we know of to speak of, high strength of emotional and psychological anxiety and arousal. Physically, he would have been very, very debilitated, and mentally as well.
As the team approached a nearby barn they had searched before, a tracker noticed a muddy sneaker print leading inside. Jackson was last seen wearing sneakers. Searchers were not sure how old the print was, or even if it was Jackson's.
We knew that there had been SWAT teams there, and we didn't know really for sure whether that was his track or one of our own tracks. Part of the mud had dried up a little bit, part of it was still wet, indicating that it was probably maybe 8 hours old.
A single gunshot rang out from the hayloft. One team member escaped unharmed, but another was trapped below.
When the shotgun went off above my head, of course there was buckshot flying all over that barn. I don't think any of us got hit by it, but I looked to my left and I saw one of the trackers jump into a stable.
Without knowing the gunman's exact location, he couldn't make his way to the door without exposing himself as a target.
Yeah.
Since the tracker had no radio, searchers spoke to him through the walls.
Okay, good.
He confirmed he had not been hit and described the interior layout so the team could plan a rescue. There was no way out except through the front door.
I saw the outcome in the Jackson case as being a violent one. I saw this going to either a barricade situation with a shootout where he is ultimately killed by the police, possibly a suicide by police where he forces the police to shoot him. I felt completely confident that there would not be a peaceful resolution to this.
The tracker waited for help, trapped inside the barn, with an armed and demented gunman perched above him. On October 2nd, 1986, the FBI and Missouri State Police surrounded a barn in Wright City where a tracker was trapped by a gunman in the hayloft, believed to be murderer Michael Wayne Jackson. As a chopper surveilled the barn from above, SWAT members took positions around the perimeter. A sharpshooter provided cover fire, hoping to distract the gunman long enough for the tracker to escape through the front door. The tactic worked. Although the tracker had been inside for several hours following the single shotgun blast from the loft, he never saw nor heard the shooter after that. FBI Special Agent in charge Hal Helterhoff was left with some tough decisions as he managed the standoff.
We didn't want to send in our troops if he had planned an ambush.
if he had just shot as a decoy, if he was still in there alive and well, but still loaded with rounds of shotgun shells. We just didn't know what we had.
The barn's owner provided agents with a detailed sketch of the interior. The farmer explained that there was tractor storage and some stalls on the bottom floor, with a hayloft above. There was a window in the loft, but no other escape routes, no hidden trenches or trap doors through which the suspect might have slipped out.
This is all floor here, and I got a whole bunch of hay over here.
Michael Wayne Jackson. We know
Agents attempted to make contact with the fugitive.
Come out, your hands on your head, and you will not be hurt.
They received no answer.
And after working so hard all those days, we didn't want to make an incorrect move and have one of our agents or officers or troopers injured at the last minute when it was unnecessary. So it was a very, very disciplined, well-organized effort.
The special agent in charge hoped tear gas would flush the shooter out. They fired non-flammable tear gas canisters into the loft. There was still no movement.
It's so dark, and we were trying to determine, should we have our tactical move, our assault? Should we wait till the next morning or wait till dawn where it's daylight? Again, we went 11 days. What's a few more hours when we know whoever's in there is trapped? And we had weather advisement that a violent storm was going to be moving in around midnight. So the state police and I decided, let's go now.
Equipped with night vision goggles, SWAT members navigated the dark, shadowy space. A pair of agents provided cover while their partners searched the lower level. They found no one on the first floor. They had no way to know if the killer was lying in wait, or if he was still there at all.
Hey guys, I got a body over here.
They had their answer soon enough. Lying amongst the hay bales, they found a man holding a shotgun who appeared to be Jackson.
Is it him?
He was dead, killed by the single shot he had fired hours earlier into his own head. Agents needed to confirm his identity.
They said, let's take his fingerprints, and we had an FBI agent, expert fingerprint examiner, on the scene with the known prints of Michael Wayne Jackson, and he took his fingerprints, and then we waited while he did his assessment, and finally he announced that it's definitely a match. It's Michael Wayne Jackson, and at that point we were all relieved.
They found no body armor on the killer. But as the FBI profiler had predicted, Michael Wayne Jackson chose to die rather than give himself up. 11 days after Michael Wayne Jackson killed his parole officer and began his crime spree, the the town of Wright City, Missouri was able to feel safe again. It could have ended much worse, according to Missouri State Patrol Sergeant Don Bizzelli.
I was relieved for the people that no one else was going to get hurt. That was my main concern. No one else in that community would have to worry about Michael Wayne Jackson anymore.
Through the sacrifice of Thomas Gall, probation officers now have the option of carrying protective sidearms. FBI Special Agent Jack Osborne was close to Gall and his family and continues to mourn the loss.
As a law enforcement officer, I think a little bit of you dies when people close to you suffer. Tom was close to me personally. Tom was a friend. He was not only a friend to me personally, but he was a friend to our office. Our office knew him, and we worked very closely with him in the Federal Probation Parole Office.
For giving up his life in the line of duty, the Indianapolis U.S. Probation Office was renamed in Thomas Gall's memory. It enabled his friends and colleagues to express in a more permanent way Gall's significant contributions, his exemplary character, and the agency's deep and lasting affection for him.